I want to welcome you to Pastor Blast. Today is Tuesday, July 19th. I'm here in the sanctuary where we have funerals and talk about struggles around suffering. The right place to be, because it strikes me that global events have been full of a lot of human suffering and dealing with evil. Think of the artilleries striking Ukraine's shopping mall there. There were victims of death and injuries and chaos. Then there's the earthquake in Afghanistan. It might have killed up to 1,000 people. And put this on top of the economic and the Taliban imposed hardships. It's like Afghanistan is the Job of all nations. And of course, the Uvalde Elementary School mass shooting, we're all reeling from that as well. Well, this last week, human suffering got a lot closer to home. Highland Park, where that 4th of July shooting happened, is about 15 minutes from my hometown, and my best friend from high school, his law office is like right around the corner from there. And then we also got news, sadly, this week that Elizabeth's first cousin, who was a former pastor, a former colleague of mine, committed suicide. And that, of course, sends reverberations throughout the family, waves of sadness and guilt and shock. That brings me to Job. Job is the most mysterious and also the most difficult biblical book. It raises questions about God's justice, the source of evil and human suffering. When we ourselves experience suffering, we usually say, "What did I do?" We're always looking for control, even in the midst of the chaos. We'll ask, "Why is this happening? How long, O Lord?" It's quite a common biblical question. And where is God? Well, full disclosure, this is another movie trailer in two parts to introduce the book of Job that we're going to start studying on July 31st, Sunday mornings at 9 a.m., having finished up our study on Proverbs. And Job doesn't really answer our questions about suffering. You can read the book, you can study the book, it's kind of frustrating. In the end, chapter 38, when God finally shows up, the questions are ignored. It's like God goes on a bit of a rampage about creation and God's sovereignty with a series of questions that have no answers. A lot of ways, God comes off as looking like a cosmic bully who wheels out the creation machine and just blow everybody away. The key to understanding Job is it is not a Q&A about how and why and what human suffering comes from. And if we come at it with those expectations, it can be frustrating. It can be terribly frustrating in all of that. But we need to understand that it is about an anatomy of a conversion, because Job is transformed from the prologue through the conclusion of the book. He is transformed, and there's something about the mystery of the cross and all of that. Well, the prologue is pretty straightforward. Job, we meet him. He's innocent, blameless, prosperous, blessed man. He's a little tightly wound. If you notice, he makes these preemptive sacrifices just in case his kids have sinned against God. And then we shift to the heavenly throne room where the sons of God are marching through. And God is there bragging about Job. "Have you considered my servant Job? He's a winner. Fear of the Lord and blameless." Well, one of the sons of God, ironically, is Satan. He is an adversary. That's what Satan literally translates as. And he's like heaven's prosecuting attorney. And he's roaming the earth in search of hypocrisy and deception among God's people. Well, having heard this bragging, Satan says, "Well, no wonder. You've blessed him, you protected, you provided him. But if you take that stuff away, he'll abandon you." Well, God says, "Okay, he's in your power." Something of a divine wager here. And the alarm bells ought to go off in our heads about this point, shouldn't it? Handing over his servant? If he can hand Job over, can't he hand us over? And what does that say about God? Who is this God? What about the God of Psalm 23, the God of mercy? How about the God revealed in Jesus Christ? How do you square that with the God that we meet in the book of Job? Well, just like that, Satan goes to work and All Job's children die, all of his wealth and flocks is stolen, and his body is covered with boils. You know, the Bible doesn't work too hard to explain suffering and the sources of evil. There's just this acknowledgement that it's part of the life and a part of the world that we're born into. The Bible does say some things, though. First, it says often that it's our fault when we suffer. And we all know this is true, caused by our own human choices, our own destructive choices. If not our own choices, perhaps someone else's choices, someone in our family who is an alcoholic certainly impacts us. Or think about Putin's war. It's a tyrant who wants a legacy, who wants to be compared to Stalin or whatever, and look at all the lives that he's destroying by that human choice. The Bible also acknowledges that suffering comes from evil forces. I'm thinking of that alienated young man who was radicalized, I assume, on the internet with hatred, who would shoot up a 4th of July parade. Or that colleague of mine, Elizabeth's cousin, who's right around my age, who goes to extremes of committing suicide. And think of all the lives that are shaken in connection with that. You know, if it is God's will for life, we know that it's Satan's will for death. The Bible also says good can come from suffering from God. There's a potential when we suffer that we're draw closer to God. That's certainly the case. And we know at the cross, somehow God redeems us and refines us in our suffering, and we're transformed. But there's, you know, when we approach people who are suffering, we require great restraint, good sense, and we need to be aware that we need wisdom. There's a huge difference, one I'll call the survival level. That's where Job is, experiencing these things of pain and loss and anxiety and fear in the midst of that crucible, that fire. And then there are those that are, you know, kind of at a little intellectual level, at a safe distance. They're feeling secure and safe, and so they want to reason it out. They want to debate the specifics about why these things are happening and where suffering comes from. Well, we really see these two collide in Job's world because the counselors show up and they, first of all, do great. They sit in Shiva for 7 days. They're silent solidarity in the silence of it all with him. But then they open their mouths, and we will continue that next time. Amen.